living in an eWorld offers unparalleled opportunities to look out at the world. Visited Google Earth, and I'm shocked to find that I can focus in on the apartment complex that I lived in Tianjin, China, for a couple of years from 2001 to 2003, and that's not live feed, but I understand, though, that satellite surveillance allows for live feed, down to very specific places that you can focus on. It's a little bit unnerving, though, to realize that we look out at the world that the glass is two-way. It's not just one way. That we can look out, but it's also possible for the world to look back. People can see, and not only we're seeing them, but they're seeing us. Unsettling to realize that this is happening. It creates security issues, and that leads us to deal with the cost of security. The government is very aware of the cost of security. I read an article about Homeland Security trying to find out what percentage of their budget, of the national budget, is attributed to security issues. Found that Homeland Security spending climbed from $56 billion in 2001 to $99.5 billion in 2005. A lot of money. And the 2009 budget calls for increases in IT spending, internet technology, intellectual technology in particular, and security especially. It's trying to figure out how we can safeguard the things that we store, national secrets, things that if people got a hold of them would create problems. Business owners are aware of the cost of security. The Federal Trade Commission issued the Fair and Accurate Credit Transactions Act in 2003, a law aimed at minimizing the risk of identity theft and consumer fraud. 2004, they issued the disposal rule that to enforce the protection and disposal of sensitive consumer data, created by the fact that if people have access to security numbers and credit card numbers, that they could take these things and do all kinds of stuff with them. The rule, they said, state that any person who maintains or otherwise possesses consumer information for a business purpose must destroy discarded consumer information, whether in paper or electronic form. Any business that stores consumer data is mandated by law to destroy the records. And it's not just government, and it's not just businesses, on a personal level. And that's kind of what drives it. We're aware of the cost of security. You hear a thing around identity theft. I did a little bit of Googling on it. Found that relative to what identity thieves can do, they can do a lot with a driver's license or Social Security number. In South Dakota, they're both the same. They can be both the same. If somebody, a smart individual, if they have access to that information, they can open new bank accounts, write bad checks, establish new credit card accounts, not pay the bills, obtain personal or car loans, get cash advances, set up cellular phones or utility services, change credit card mailing addresses, create all kinds of problems. How do they do it? I guess you can access the information in a number of different ways, anywhere from a lost wallet or checkbook. Keep a lot of documents in there. The numbers can be found and used. Dumpster diving, believe it or not. Individuals can actually rummage through the trash and get papers and bills and use information located there to be able to do that kind of stuff. Mail theft can occur. Mail left in a mailbox for a long period of time, and you've got some numbers, and you can use those numbers. Not you. Accusing you of being identity thieves. Online data, I guess that's more difficult to do, although possible. How do you prevent it? A couple things, and we're not going to stick in this for a long time, but I thought it was worth passing on, because it really is, as we think about living in an e-world, and the security issues that we face are different. We'll see that they're age-old. We've always dealt with security issues. But the specific nature of security issues these days, a little bit different. And a couple just common sense tips. I'll talk about them a little bit. Use credit cards and debit cards wisely. Naturally, if they're stolen, report it immediately. Cancel all inactive credit cards. Don't volunteer personal information. Boy, I tell you what, it's amazing how tricky. When you buy stuff online, They have these things. For a while I was getting them all the time. There's a bad transaction occurred in my bank. It looks like Wells Fargo Bank or Home Federal Bank. And they asked for, the information, give us this number. And then they asked for, and I started to fill it out. And then I looked down at the thing and it asked for PIN number. I said, PIN number? And then it's at that point I began, wait a minute, you're not dealing with somebody who just climbed up the cabbage truck. Almost so. But that can work. It's amazing the amount of scams that can occur. Closely monitor the expiration dates of your credit cards. And if your card is expired and they didn't send you a new one, sign all credit cards upon receipt. Not only use credit cards and debit cards wisely, and if you want to get more information like this, all you do is just Google identity theft, and they'll have a number of things that will be helpful. Safeguard personal information. Request electronic version of bill statements and checks instead of paper. I'd rather use paper. They're saying it's safer as far as identity theft is concerned to do things electronically. Shred all personal and financial information, and that's one of the big things. One of the articles talked about all the different kinds of shredders you can buy. That do it in strips, and some that can do it crossways. And if you shred your documents, even in terms of just your own private bills, then they're not going to be able to dive into your dumpster and be able to get all kinds of records. So it goes on and on. Don't give your Social Security number, credit card number, or any bank account details over the phone. The high cost of security. There's unique security issues in an eWorld, but the problem of security is ages old, and that's what we're going to talk about. Look the first verse in 1 Samuel 10. 17 through 19. 1 Samuel 10, it's in the sheet that's in your worship folder. It says, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. I brought Israel up out of Egypt, and I delivered you from the power of Egypt and all the kingdoms that oppressed you. But you have now rejected your God, who saves you out of all your calamities and distresses. And you have said, no, set a king over us." And what they indicated, sometimes we can look to people to be sources of protection, and that's government-wise, that's really what Israel wanted at that time. God had said that He was the one that delivered them out of Egypt, but the people got to the place where they said, no, we really want a king. And they wanted a king for a couple of different reasons. It says in the passage, we want somebody to lead us. And that's not a bad thing, to have leadership. They wanted a king because the king could go out before us. And in terms of battle or in terms of any one of a number of things, if you have somebody in a leadership position, that person can go out first. And they said, when they were justifying their desire for a king, and they didn't, again, God said, well, there's going to be issues with this, but they said, no, we really want a king because we want a king to fight our battles for us. And what they discovered, that there are costs that go with having a king. There would be taxes, and this is what ended up happening. When a king was in power, then the king needed to eat, and so did his entourage, and therefore the people needed to be taxed relative to food and different commodities so that the government could function. If the king established some projects that he wanted to build, and in the case of Israel, they had significant building projects, where's the labor going to come from? It's going to come from the people. And for Israel, they didn't have Jewish slaves, but any conquered people were slaves, and Jews then also had to work. They worked a month on and 2 months off, and they also had to become part of the military. So there were costs of having a king, and then the cost of security. When it came to the place after Solomon's reign, when Solomon did a lot of building, and they had a very successful government, very profitable and prosperous. The people, as you see, they came to Solomon's successor and said, your father put a heavy yoke on us, but now lighten the harsh labor and the heavy yoke he put on us, and we will serve you. What they found is that it was, okay, one thing to have a king, but then, gosh, there's the heavy yoke. You know, we have to give them all this food, and we have to be part of all these building projects, and then we have to staff the military, and this has been burdensome under Solomon, and we can understand that. It seems that, again, we can't do without people protection, but perhaps the issue is that you have to provide for the protector in that case. You have to provide for the protector, and that's one thing they came to see afterwards. At first, give us a king, because he'll do 1, 2, 3. But then once they had a king, they said, boy, we didn't know we were going to have to do A, B, C. So, it's kind of nice to have a king, but lighten it up, because we're tired of providing for the protector. People can be used as sources of security. Not just people, possessions can be used as sources of security. Look what it says. Solomon said this, the name of the Lord is a strong tower. The righteous run to it and are safe. The wealth of the rich is their fortified city. They imagine it an inescalable wall. And it's possible to conceive of possessions as ensuring safety in the future. Well, are you going to be safe? 15, 20 years from now, you say, well, yeah, I am, because this retirement account I have, this amount of money I have, creates for me a pocket of protection. And the Solomon's saying, the name of the Lord is a strong tower. The righteous run to it and are safe. Calling out to God is really a source of security, and we'll see that in a little bit. The wealth of the rich is their fortified city. They imagine it an unscalable wall. And if you look at the foundation of amassing and trying to get more and more, would you agree with me, it's a security issue. The more money I have, the more safeguarded I will be, the more secure I can be in the case of any eventuality. The cost of security, and we saw it relative to the king, it said, your father put a heavy yoke on us, but now lighten the harsh labor and the heavy yoke he put on us, and we will serve you. We talked about the cost of security is that you have to provide for the protector. You also have to protect the protector when it comes to possessions. But it says, the sleep of a laborer is sweet, whether he eats little or much. But the abundance of a rich man permits him no sleep. That should be sleep. The abundance of a rich man permits him no sleep. And I think what he's getting at is that once you've amassed an amount of money, you need to protect it. And therefore, the money that provided security, now you need to protect the source of security. I wonder if that, in fact, I think that's what Jesus was getting at when he talked about put up treasure in heaven. And then he contrasts that with treasure on earth. And then he talks about, because when it's treasure on earth, moth and rust destroy, and thieves break in and steal. And I think he's calling attention to the fact that when our source of security is worldly possessions, that we have to put effort in order to protect the source of protection. And that's part of the cost of security. Now, we can't do without money, and we can't do without leadership. So I'm not saying boot these out. Like JC said last week, we're not going to talk about get rid of it. You can't get rid of things. They're part of how we live. But I think it's good to look at them and understand what they can and cannot do. God is a source of security. Look what it says in Isaiah 55. Come, all you who are thirsty, come to the waters. And you who have no money, come, buy and eat. Come, buy wine and milk without money and without cost. Why spend money on what is not bread, and your labor on what does not satisfy? Give ear and come to me. Hear me, that your soul may live. Different picture, what he indicates there is that God provides security for those unable to provide it for themselves. And he says, come and buy that which you need without money and without cost. He's not saying rob stores, but I think at some level he's saying there is a difference between the nature of his transactions and the nature of transactions of other sources of security. When it comes to people, you have to provide for the protector. You have to provide things so that the protector can live. When it's possessions, you have to protect the protector. You have to build bank vaults, keep things out. But when it comes to God, He is in a different class. He says, no, the transaction is not a money transaction because, frankly, there's nothing God needs. He doesn't need your money. He can function fine on his own. And when He offers protection and security, it's not something that you have to pay for. He doesn't need to be provided for, nor does He need to be protected. And I think that's kind of at the point here. And He's indicating the difference between Him and other sources of security. So as we look about the cost of security, when it's a person, they can put a heavy yoke. Taxes can be levied, which can feel heavy, we're in that part of the year. The sleep of labor is sweet, but a person who is securing themselves by finances has to protect the finances so that they don't go away and they're maintained. What it says with God, and it's a verse that we have looked at time and time again over the course of the last year. It says, keep your lives free from the love of money. Be content with what you have because God has said, never will I leave you, never will I forsake you. So we say with confidence, the Lord is my helper. I will not be afraid. What can man do to me? And when it references what God would say, it's understanding, believing, knowing what God promises. When He says, never will I leave you, never will I forsake you, the passage indicates that believing this can be a safeguard against drawing too much security from money. I think that's the point of the passage. Let your lives be free from the love of money. Be content with what you have. Why? Because God has said, never will I leave you, never will I forsake you. And again, it's not a matter of because God said don't. What He's saying is you have to protect that, or you have to provide for that. But God, as a source of security, His promises are bulletproof. He says, if you call out to me, I am a refuge. And understanding His promises, focusing, knowing what they are, putting your confidence in them. But you can't really put your confidence in something that you don't know. That's why, if you were to learn a verse, I think this is a great verse to learn. Do you know this verse? We talked about it last summer. Have you memorized this? Just that part. Never will I leave you, never will I forsake you. If you had that, if it's something that you thought about, as your belief in that promise increases, it provides a protection from finding security, too much security in other places. Close your eyes. Can you? Never will I leave you, never will I forsake you. If you carry that around in your mind, when you're making out the monthly budget or a retirement plan, remember, He said, never will I leave you, never will I forsake you. And never means never. It doesn't mean don't invest in a retirement plan. But what it does mean, ultimately, money is not a viable source of security. It's untenable. But God, well, what does it say? Why is God a source of security? Because He says, never will I leave you, never will I forsake you. When you're in a place where you require assistance, God is not going to leave. Say, okay. So in that place, He will be there. That's what not leave means. Not only will He not leave, He won't forsake. Forsake is more about, well, I'm standing here and I'm not leaving, but I'm not going to do anything. And God will do neither of those. He will never leave you nor forsake you. That's what distinguishes God. And then, from this perspective, we're in a position to understand something that we see in the Bible a lot. And we know that it's wrong, but perhaps we don't know why. Idolatry. And then when we look at idolatry, one thing that maybe could clear it up for us is that understanding that idolatry is a security issue. Let me show you what I mean. Let's look at the root of idolatry. Let's read from the passage that's in the worship folder. It's what happened about a month and a half after God showed up on Mount Sinai. It was really scary. And God said He showed up. It was powerful. It was thunder and lightning. It wasn't billowy clouds. It was thunder clouds. That's God's up there. And it was, people were afraid. Even Moses was afraid. And God said, will you do what I asked you to do? And the people said, yes. Sure. And, but a month and a half later, here's what happened. A month and a half later, when the people saw that Moses was so long in coming down from the mountain, they gathered around Aaron and said, come, make us gods who will go before us. As for this fellow Moses who brought us out of Egypt, we don't know what's happened to him. So what ends up happening, they bring Aaron a bunch of jewelry and gold and things that they could make a form of a god from. And Aaron, he took what they handed him and made it into an idol, cast into the shape of a calf, fashioning it with a tool. Then they said, these are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt. You know, when you look at something like this, it seems really ridiculous. I mean, anybody with the IQ, let's say of eggplant maybe, would understand that if you make this thing, it can't afford you any protection. You know, it seems nonsensical when we look back. And that's why idolatry is kind of hard for us to understand, because it caused them all kinds of trouble. You know, God said, don't make yourself an idol. And why in the world, when God said don't, and then He punished them for doing it, they were disciplined, and then they did it again? I think it's important to understand that idolatry is a security issue. And what they're saying here, we have no one to lead us through the wilderness. And you don't want to wander through the wilderness without a source of security. That's what the image provided. The image stood for the God who, seeing that image, would go along with you. And that's what drove idolatry. It was the need for protection. We're going through an arduous journey. And we dare not do so without a God in our back pocket. Now, Moses is up there and he speaks for God, but we don't know what happened to him, so God might be busy. We need someone to walk with us, someone to protect us. You can understand that, right? We can understand that. Walking through life is scary. There's all kinds of nasty things happening out there. And we want security just in case, don't we? We understand that. That's what they're looking at here. That's why they want what they want. In fact, what's interesting, they walked through the wilderness and they made the golden calf, and you know what happened. Moses said that's wrong and broke the commandments, and they ended up struggling with the source of security their whole wilderness journey time. Then they get into the promised land. And here's what happens. They knew at that point that God is really good at getting you through the wilderness. But now they were in the promised land. And here's really what happened. Now they weren't making golden calves anymore, but there was another god that was worshipped whose name was Baal. And Baal then became a thorn and another form of idolatry that the Israelites could not keep their hands off of. And here's why. Because the people in the promised land who lived there, who were building houses and building cities and growing crops, said, yeah, your God, the one who walked with you through the wilderness, the one who won't let you make an idol and an image, yeah, He's really good in the wilderness. But look around. This isn't the wilderness. This is city. This is agriculture. And, yeah, your God is good with sand and dust. But He's not really good with crops, is He? Oh, boy, that's a good thought. Boy, I never thought of that. But Baal is really good with crops. So just in case, you want fertile soil, you want good businesses, you want a great crop, Baal's your man. Oh, okay, fine, yeah, give me the statue. And that's what ended up happening, and they were not able to keep their hands off Baal worship. Why? Because they liked little statues? No, it was a security issue. They said, boy, how can I make sure my business is going to grow? We understand that, don't we? God said, never will I leave you, never will I forsake you. Yeah, that's nice for, that churchy stuff. You're really good at that. And if I If I'm afraid somebody's going to steal the check I put into the offering bag, I'll let you know. But real life, I need more than this God who makes pithy promises. I need something real, because life is dangerous. And so we look to other sources to secure us. And again, it's not saying don't use them, but God says, I am the one to secure you. Why is that? Here's what he says to you. Never will I leave you. Never will I leave you. And never will I forsake you. If you look to God and call on his name, what he indicates to you, I will never back away when you're in a jam. Now, I won't always give you what you want, but I'm not going to disappear. And if I'm there, I will not say, I'm sorry, you didn't do it well enough. God claims to be the source of security. And what he says, he wants to be your source of security. Wow. That's not just about church. About life. About life in an eWorld. That's what he wants you to believe. Never will I leave you, never will I forsake you. How do we know that? He sent his son to die for you. There's nothing God will withhold in terms of provision and protection. If he was going to withhold, would he have sent his son? No. He really does care for you, you know. That's not just talk. He really does. What it says in terms of why we get in trouble, God says later on, and he kind of puts a caption underneath why Israel got in so much trouble. That's what he says. These wicked people who refuse to listen to my words, who follow the stubbornness of their hearts and go after other gods to serve and worship them, will be like this belt, completely useless. God said, take a linen belt, put it in the ground so that it disintegrates, and then take it out. And it says that's what relying on a false source of security is like. Trying to hold your pants up with a belt that's frayed and shredded. And it seems to indicate three things that happen that move us from seeing God as a source of security to moving away from doing that. It's not all at once. There's a process that happens. I think it's a three. We tune out God. That's first. Secondly, we tune in self. Thirdly, we turn from God. Tune out God, tune in self, turn from God. And I think here's how it works. We get in a place where life looks kind of scary. And we kind of look at the Bible and we think, well, yeah, but you don't seem to be doing so. I'm going to turn down the volume on God. I know they talk about believing your promises and thinking about that you'll never leave or forsake, but you don't seem to be doing it. So I'm just going to tune out God. Now, I don't think we ever do it that deliberately, but we just don't give it as much time. You know what I mean? It just becomes less important. We tune out God, then tune in self. Okay, I still need security. I still need protection. And if I've tuned God out, then I'm going to be looking for something else. And so what works for me? I tune in self. What seems right to me? The Bible says there's a way that seems right to a man, but the end of that way is death. We're not good sources of security. We're not even good at knowing where good security is found. We would just as soon take a route to security that will end up killing us. And that's a problem. So there's tuning out God leads to tuning in self. And then when we tune in self, that's when we turn from God. But that's kind of what it looks like. What do we do then? What do we do? Let's count the cost. When God was talking to the Israelites, they were always looking to other nations to protect them. And Shishak was the king of Egypt, the Pharaoh in Egypt. And they said, things were a little bit scary. We're going to come into a treaty with Egypt, and they can protect us. And here's what God said. My wrath will not be poured out on Jerusalem through Shishak. The Israelites came to the place where God said, I don't like what you're doing. I am your protector, and I want you to trust me. And they said, God, gosh, we blew it. We've been trying to find our security in things that don't provide it. And God said, okay, my wrath will not be poured out. They will, however, become subject to him so that they may learn the difference between serving me and serving the kings of other lands. What God said is, okay, I'm going to give you an object lesson. Now, you're determined to try to find your security in the king of Egypt. So here's what's going to happen. I'm going to allow you to serve him. And what's going to happen when you serve him? You will need to provide for him. And he will ask things of you and demand things of you that I won't. And that's what God ended up doing. I love when Mark Lauritsen talks about the cost we pay for addictions. And what he says, and he'll say it again at other times, but I think so, it just makes so much sense when he references life in addiction. For instance, alcohol, which is I'm free to do whatever I want. But it's not really free, is it? There's the investment in the substance. And then your whole life is kind of revolved around protecting your ability to use the substance. And you're doing that in order to feel protected. But now you've got to protect the lifestyle that you rely on for protection. Does that make sense? That's not really freedom, is it? It's like you have to bear the consequences of trying to get your security in a lifestyle that can't provide it. And it's not just that way with alcohol. Money is that way. Or trying to live in the light so you make people happy so they can protect you. Those things are ultimately not real viable sources of protection because you end up having to provide for the protector or to protect the protector. And God said, okay, go ahead. Go to Egypt, but I'll let you go to them and then you're going to experience. It's not free. But what he would say, keep your lives free from the love of money, be content with what you have, because God has said, never will I leave you, never will I forsake you. So we say with confidence, the Lord is my helper, I will not be afraid. What can man do to me? Count the cost. You know what communion is about? It's about promises, and what we're going to do, we're going to have some music, and you're going to come and take the juice and take the bread. And what I want you to think about as you're taking those elements, this represents God's commitment to you. Listen to me. This is not just about the forgiveness of sins. It has to do with that. This is about promises. How serious is God about what He promised? I will never leave you or forsake you. Does He really mean that? You know what that represents? God saying, I care about you and my promises you can rely on because I am not going to hold out on you. If I held out on you, I never would have sent my Son. And this is not just about forgiveness. This is about promises. How can you know that He will be a source of security? He didn't withhold His Son. He didn't withhold His Son. Yeah, you know what I mean? It's not just about forgiveness. It's about never will I leave you. It's about never will I forsake you. How can I know that? When you come and grab the juice and the bread, I want you to think of the words, never will I leave you. Never will I forsake you. That's what this table is about being able to trust God because He showed and demonstrated His love. We're going to have the songs and then come on up and take the elements and think of what Jesus did and what that says about God's commitment and how He'll keep His promises. Of insecurity, we are able to see things globally, scary things. Would you help us to move towards placing more of our security and our connection with You? It seems to me, God, that's not going to happen overnight. It's a process. But it is a process where You increase. Your promises become bigger. Their impact becomes deeper. And it does happen. And I pray, would You continue to lead us on that road? And so as we look to You, then we find an ability to not place as much weight on other sources of protection. Thanks that you are a great teacher, and I really am so thankful for your promises. And I pray you give us an ability to sink our roots deep into them. That you do tell us, never will you leave us, never will you forsake us. And you mean what you say. We can see what your commitment is because you sent your Son. In Jesus' name, amen. Next week we'll talk about living in an eWorld, spirituality. Hope you're able to come back.